On my 84th birthday, my children handed me papers, not flowers, not cake, a power of attorney. They laughed as they planned to sell my house while I was still alive. I stayed quiet, only smiling. Months later, they sat across from me, stunned, as I cut them out of my will forever. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Evelyn Carter sat in her favorite armchair, the same one Richard had bought her on their 40th wedding anniversary. The fabric was worn smooth where her hands rested, polished by years of quiet waiting. Outside, September sunlight bled through the curtains, golden but cold. Inside, she felt the silence of her home press in on her like a heavy quilt. At 84, Evelyn had discovered a cruel truth. You could be alive, breathing, even speaking, and still invisible. Her children visited less and less. When they did come, they no longer saw her. Their eyes skimmed over her the way one glances at an old photograph, familiar, perhaps sentimental, but no longer essential. They spoke around her, not to her. Conversations bloomed in the living room as if she were furniture, a relic in the corner. She heard them that Sunday afternoon, their voices floating down the hall. Karen laughed, bright and brittle. That china cabinet? Honestly, who even uses china anymore? It's just collecting dust. We could sell it, make space for something useful. Andrew's tone was sharper, practical. The house is too much for her. Maintenance, taxes, repairs, it's all a burden. She'd be better off in a facility. We could sell this place before the market drops. Stephen's voice carried the force of authority. I've already drafted the paperwork for power of attorney. Once she signs, everything will be simpler. We'll manage her accounts, her care, everything. She won't have to worry. Evelyn sat frozen, her pulse hammering in her ears. Not one word about what she wanted, not one mention of memories carved into these walls, of Richard's laughter echoing across the porch, of birthdays and Christmases lived in this house. To them, she wasn't a woman, not even a mother, just a ledger, an inventory of assets waiting to be divided. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. They wouldn't hear it. She had tried before, only to be met with the gentle, patronizing tones reserved for children. You don't need to worry about that, Mom. We'll take care of it. The words stripped her of voice, of authority, of self, invisible. That evening, Karen entered her bedroom without knocking. We've been talking, she said, her smile stretched too wide. You shouldn't be alone anymore. We think it's time to hire a caregiver, someone young, someone who can help with the day-to-day things. The word hit Evelyn like a blow. Caregiver, another stranger in her house, another set of eyes watching her, another reminder she was no longer trusted to stand on her own. She wanted to scream that she was still capable, that her mind was clear, that she could make her own tea, pay her own bills, walk through her own garden. She wanted to beg them to stop turning her life into a negotiation. Instead, she nodded faintly, her throat too tight to force sound. When the door closed, she pressed her face into her pillow and wept. Not loud, racking sounds, those belonged to younger grief, but quiet tears that slid into her hairline, as silent as she had become. Night deepened. Shadows stretched across the walls, and the house, her house, creaked with the weight of memory. She sat back in her chair, eyes tracing the lines of photographs on the mantel. Richard's smile captured decades earlier. The children, gap-toothed and sticky-fingered, clutching ice cream cones. Back when they still needed her. Back when she was not yet invisible. Now their voices in the kitchen drifted like knives through the air. She can't keep this up much longer, Andrew muttered. Stephen sighed. It's not a matter of if, it's when. The sooner we act, the smoother it'll be. They were deciding her fate as if she weren't alive in the next room. Evelyn closed her eyes. She thought of Richard, of the promise he had whispered when illness took him years ago. You're strong, Evie. Don't let them take that from you. But tonight, strength felt like a memory. The house that had once been her fortress now felt like a stage set, her presence fading into the backdrop. Her children, flesh of her flesh, had already begun rehearsing the lines of her absence. And so Evelyn Carter, once the heartbeat of this family, sat quietly in the dark, her spirit cracking, but not yet shattered, as the first stone of betrayal settled heavy on her chest. Tomorrow they would bring a stranger into her home. Tomorrow, the slow erasure would begin in earnest. But tonight she let the silence speak, carrying her grief into the empty spaces where once she had been seen, cherished, and whole. The following week, Evelyn Carter waited in her living room, hands folded neatly in her lap, as if posture could shield her from the intrusion about to cross her threshold. Her children had arranged it without her blessing, of course. She had not chosen this woman. She had not chosen any of it. The doorbell rang, a bright, cheerful sound at odds with the dread thudding in Evelyn's chest. Karen hurried to answer, her voice pitched high with false warmth. "You must be Emily. Come in. Come in." Evelyn turned her head slowly. A young woman stepped into the house, sunlight catching the chestnut strands of her hair. She carried no clipboard, no clinical air of detachment. Instead, she wore a soft smile that seemed to reach her eyes. "Mrs. Carter?" the girl asked gently, walking toward her with careful steps. "It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Emily." Evelyn inclined her head, guarded. Another stranger, she thought. Another reminder I am no longer trusted with myself. But then Emily did something unexpected. She knelt beside the armchair, lowering herself so their eyes met at the same level. "I know I'm here to help," she said quietly, "but I don't want to intrude. You tell me what you need and I'll listen." Listen, such a simple word, such a rare gift. Evelyn blinked, uncertain if she had heard correctly. The days unfolded in small gestures. Emily brought her cookies one afternoon, still warm, the scent of butter and sugar softening the sterile air of obligation that had clung to the house since Richard died. Another day, she arrived with a vase of wildflowers, setting them gently on the kitchen table. "They reminded me of you," Emily said. Evelyn frowned. "Of me? Wow. Because they're resilient. They grow where no one expects them to." For the first time in months, Evelyn laughed, an honest, startled sound that seemed to surprise even herself. It wasn't only the gifts. Emily listened to her stories without glancing at a clock. She asked about Richard, about the children when they were young, about the garden Evelyn once tended with proud hands. She laughed at the silly tales, sighed at the tragic ones, and never once cut her short with a dismissive, "You've told that one before." Something shifted. The house no longer echoed with emptiness. The silence that had been suffocating began to soften, filled with conversation, with laughter, with the rustle of footsteps that did not feel like trespass, but companionship. Late one evening, Evelyn sat in her chair, the glow of a single lamp casting shadows across the walls. Emily was gathering dishes from the table. Evelyn cleared her throat, hesitant. "You're different from the others." Emily looked up. "Others?" "The nurses, the orderlies, even my children sometimes." Evelyn's voice cracked, but she continued. "They see an old woman, a burden. You look at me as if I still exist." Emily set down the dishes and crossed the room. She took Evelyn's frail hand into her warm one, firm and steady. "You're not alone, Mrs. Carter. You'll never be alone as long as I'm here." The words sank into Evelyn's bones like heat on a winter morning. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in something close to hope. But hope can be fragile. It happened suddenly, without warning. Evelyn was in the kitchen, reaching for a tea cup when the floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. The cup shattered against the tiles as her body betrayed her. She gasped, clutching at nothing, darkness closing in at the edges of her vision. "Mrs. Carter!" Emily's voice cut through the haze, urgent, terrified. Strong arms caught her before she struck the ground. Evelyn heard the scramble of a phone, the rush of words she couldn't make sense of. Sirens in the distance, cold air against her cheeks. As the world slipped away, she felt Emily's hand pressing hers, heard the desperate promise whispered into her ear. "Hold on, I won't let them take you. Not like this. Not ever." And then everything went black. The sharp scent of disinfectant was the first thing Evelyn Carter noticed when she woke. Her eyelids fluttered open to a ceiling she did not know. White panels, too bright, humming faintly with fluorescent light. The air carried no warmth of home, only the sterile chill of a place where comfort was an afterthought. She tried to push herself upright, but her arms trembled, too weak. Tubes trailed from her hand, a monitor beeped steadily at her side, and the thin blanket scratched against her skin. Panic surged through her chest. This wasn't her bedroom. This wasn't her house. "Where am I?" she whispered. But the empty room gave no answer. Footsteps approached. A nurse entered briskly, not unkind but not tender either. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter. You're at Shady Grove Care Facility. You had a fall. Your children thought it best you be admitted here for your safety." Shady Grove. The words felt like chains tightening around her wrists. She shook her head weakly. "No, I didn't agree to this. I never signed." The nurse's polite smile hardened into something rehearsed. "Everything's been arranged, ma'am. Your children provided the necessary documents. You'll be well looked after." Evelyn's heart pounded. Documents? Arrangements? Without her voice, without her choice? She wanted to scream, but the sound came out broken, strangled by disbelief. Hours blurred into days. Meals arrived on trays, tasteless and lukewarm. Doors locked with quiet clicks. Her belongings, her photographs, her china, her books were gone, replaced by generic prints on the walls, a closet of state-issued clothes. The rhythm of Shady Grove swallowed her whole. Lights on, lights off, pills distributed without explanation. She was buried alive, entombed in a place designed to strip her of everything that tethered her to the life she had built. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Evelyn sat slumped in her chair, staring at the storm. The door creaked open. A familiar face slipped inside. "Emily," Evelyn gasped, her throat raw. Emily rushed to her side, kneeling low, her eyes wide with urgency. "I had to see you. They told me you were here, but I knew you wouldn't have chosen this. Tell me, did you?" Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. "No, they signed. They didn't even ask me. My children, my own children." Emily's jaw tightened, fury flickering behind her gentle expression. She reached for Evelyn's frail hands, clasping them firmly. "Listen to me. This isn't the end. You still have rights. You still have a voice. They can't silence you unless you let them." Evelyn shook her head. "They already have. I'm nothing here. A body in a bed, a signature on a page." "No," Emily's voice cut through the despair like a blade. "You are Evelyn Carter. You are not their property. You are not a burden. You are a woman who has lived, who has loved, who deserves dignity. And I swear to you, I'll fight until you get it back." For a moment, Evelyn could almost breathe again. Hope flickered, fragile but alive. She clung to Emily's hands as though they were the last solid thing in a world dissolving beneath her. Outside, the storm thundered, rattling the glass. Inside, Evelyn's resolve, long dormant, stirred in her chest. She would not vanish quietly. Not yet. The next morning, when the nurse arrived with another tray of bland food, Evelyn lifted her chin, her voice steady though her body shook. "Tell whoever signed those papers, I am not finished, and I will not be kept here." The nurse blinked, startled by the steel in her tone. Evelyn let the silence stretch, savoring the first ember of defiance glowing in her chest. She might be trapped inside Shady Grove's walls, but her spirit had begun to stir, pulled back from the edge of surrender by the quiet, unyielding promise of a single ally. Evelyn Carter was still here, and she would fight. The days at Shady Grove dragged with a cruel sameness, each one designed to grind down resistance. Lights at dawn, pills at noon, silence at night. Yet inside Evelyn Carter, something had shifted. The ember Emily had lit refused to die. She began to count the hours not in meals or medications, but in opportunities, moments to push back, however small. Emily came as often as the facility would allow. Sometimes she arrived with pamphlets from advocacy groups, sometimes with stacks of forms Evelyn could barely understand, but signed with shaking hands. "Every signature is a step back to your life," Emily told her. "They can't bury you if you keep speaking." Nurses rolled their eyes, muttering about that meddling girl. But Evelyn clung to Emily's determination. For the first time in months, she felt less like prey, more like a woman mounting her own quiet war. Weeks stretched on, thick with waiting. Then one pale morning, Emily entered with her eyes shining. "They can't hold you here anymore. We've filed every paper, made every call. You're being discharged." The word felt like air after drowning. Discharged. Evelyn's heart fluttered, her fingers trembling as she reached for Emily's arm. "Home." Emily hesitated. "Not the house, not yet. Your children, they've been busy. They sold it." The news landed like a knife, sharp and merciless. Evelyn's breath caught. Sold it? The house Richard had built with his hands. The place that held every laughter, every tear, every heartbeat of their life together. Gone. Without her consent. Without her knowledge. Her children had not only locked her away, they had carved her past from beneath her feet. Emily steadied her as the world spun. I found records, forged documents, signatures that aren't yours. They've been liquidating assets behind your back. Evelyn's knees buckled, fury surging stronger than her frailty. Betrayal had weight, and it pressed heavy on her chest. She closed her eyes, forcing her breath into slow, deliberate rhythm. She would not collapse again. Not now. When the discharge papers were finally signed, Emily guided her out of Shady Grove. The sky outside was a clear winter blue. Oh, I know, wide and merciless, but Evelyn tilted her face to it, savoring freedom like sunlight after years in shadow. They did not return to the house that was no longer hers. Instead, Emily drove her to a small apartment Evelyn had once purchased as an investment. The rooms were modest, the walls bare, but they were hers. The door closed behind them with a final blessed click. For the first time in months, Evelyn was not under watch, not under lock and key. She stood in the center of the living room, her hand brushing the wall. Empty, yes, but also clean. A place not yet tainted by betrayal. That night, she sat at the window, gazing out at the city lights, her mind a storm of grief and clarity. Her children had stolen her home, her possessions, her trust. They had stripped her down to skin and bone, leaving her with nothing but breath and memory. And yet, breath was enough. Betrayal, she wealthiest, was a brutal teacher. It carved away illusions until only truth remained. Her children did not see her as mother, not anymore. They saw an obstacle, a ledger, a collection of valuables to be divided. Blood, it turned out, was not the same as loyalty. Emily sat across from her, silent but watchful. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice calm, every word cut from ice. I will not weep for what they've taken. I will fight for what remains. Emily nodded slowly, a flicker of pride in her eyes. Then we fight, but not with despair, with precision, with proof. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her frail frame outlined by the lamplight. Rage simmered in her veins, but it was no longer wild or panicked. It had hardened into resolve. She had been silenced, erased, betrayed, but not broken. In the hush of that apartment, Evelyn Carter made a vow to herself, to Richard's memory, to the life she had yet to live. She would not fade quietly into the corner of someone else's decision. She would stand, she would speak, she would carve her own ending, one stroke at a time. And as the city hummed outside her window, Evelyn's war began, not with a scream, but with the quiet, unyielding whisper of a woman who refused to be erased. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint, a sharp reminder of its emptiness. Evelyn Carter sat at the small kitchen table, her hands folded tightly, the skin stretched thin over her knuckles. A single lamp cast a circle of light around her, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. She had lost her home, her possessions, her trust in her children. Yet within her, something new had taken root, not despair, but an icy clarity. Emily brewed tea on the stove, the faint whistle of the kettle filling the silence. She placed the cup in front of Evelyn, then sat down across from her. You've been quiet all evening. Evelyn lifted her eyes. They no longer wavered, no longer searched for mercy where none remained. I want to revoke everything. Emily blinked. Everything? My will, my estate, every document that ties them to me. Evelyn's voice did not rise, but the force behind it was undeniable. They sold my home while I was alive. They forged my name. They buried me before I stopped breathing. They will not inherit the ashes of what they tried to steal. Emily's lips parted, shock softening into sadness. Evelyn, you don't have to do this because of me. I never wanted your money. I know. Evelyn reached across the table, her fingers brushing Emily's hand. That's why it has to be you. Because you saw me when they didn't. Because you gave me back my voice. Because family isn't blood, it's loyalty. And you, Emily, you are my family now. Tears shimmered in Emily's eyes, sliding down her cheeks before she could wipe them away. She pressed Evelyn's hand between both of hers. I don't deserve this. You deserve more than I can give, Evelyn whispered. But this, at least, I can choose. For the first time in a long time, it will be my choice. The next morning, Mr. Harrison arrived. Evelyn's loyal lawyer, Arshir, graying but steady, carried his briefcase into the modest apartment. He greeted her with a quiet bow of respect, as if acknowledging not only her age but her endurance. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently, "I've reviewed the documents your children filed. There are irregularities, clear signs of forgery. We'll pursue justice. But you asked me here for something else." "Yes." Evelyn's voice was firm. "I want to rewrite my will, effective immediately." The papers were drawn, her signature, though shaky, etched across the page with deliberate strokes. She signed with a hand that remembered every betrayal and yet still trembled with the triumph of choice. When the pen left the paper, Evelyn leaned back, her chest heaving as if she had just finished a long climb. The room was still, the air heavy with the weight of the moment. Then slowly, relief washed over her, like a tide breaking free from the shore. Emily sat silently, her eyes swollen from tears. When Mr. Harrison left, she turned to Evelyn. "I don't know how to thank you, but please believe me, I would have stayed even if you had nothing left." Evelyn smiled faintly, her face lined with sorrow but lit by a quiet pride. "That's why you deserve everything I still have. Not the money, not the furniture, not the property. None of that matters. What matters is that my life, my dignity, won't be handed to the people who tried to erase me." Emily knelt beside her chair, resting her head lightly against Evelyn's frail shoulder. Evelyn stroked her hair, a gesture both maternal and tender. For a moment, it was as though the years fell away, and she was once again the mother of small children who needed her touch to know they were safe. But this time, it was Evelyn who needed the comfort, to remind herself that she was still here, still capable of shaping her fate. The evening deepened, the city outside humming with life, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place in a small apartment. Evelyn Carter had reclaimed her voice, not with shouting or rage, but with ink and paper, with a decision that could not be undone. Her body might have been frail, her hands unsteady, but her will, her true will, had never been stronger. She stared out of the window, the glow of streetlights painting the glass, and whispered to herself, to Richard, to the silent night, "I am not finished. Not yet." The living room of the apartment was quiet, yet charged with a tension that made the air feel heavy. Evelyn Carter sat in her chair, her back straight, her hands resting calmly on her lap. Across from her, 3 chairs waited, soon to be filled. Tonight would not be a casual visit. Tonight she had summoned her children, not as a mother seeking comfort, but as a woman demanding truth. The knock came, sharp and hurried. Emily opened the door, and the Carter children entered one by one. Andrew first, his suit pressed, his tie knotted with precision, his expression cool. Karen followed, eyes red as if she had been crying, clutching her purse as though it could shield her. Stephen came last, his jaw set hard, his stance defensive before a word was spoken. Evelyn studied them, these children of hers, now strangers dressed in familiar skin. Once their laughter had filled her kitchen. Once their hands had reached for hers in the dark. Tonight their eyes shifted uneasily, unable to meet her steady gaze. "Sit," she said softly. They obeyed, the scrape of the chairs echoing against the walls. Silence stretched, thick and unyielding, until Andrew finally spoke. "Mother, we don't want to fight. We're only trying to make sure you're cared for. That's all this has ever been." Karen's voice trembled. "Please, Mom, don't let anger blind you. We just—" Stephen cut her off, his tone sharp. "This is manipulation. Look at her. Look at Emily sitting beside her. You think this girl cares for you? She's after your money, can't you see it? She's poisoned you against your own family." Evelyn's lips curved, not in a smile but in something colder. "Family?" Her voice carried no tremor, only the weight of steel. "You sold my home. You forged my name. You locked me away as if I were already dead. You buried me before I stopped breathing." The words cracked through the air like glass shattering. Andrew shifted uncomfortably. Karen pressed a tissue to her eyes, tears spilling. Though whether from guilt or fear, Evelyn no longer cared. Stephen's face darkened, his anger barely restrained. "I gave you everything," Evelyn continued. her voice rising with a strength that surprised even her. I gave you my years, my labor, my love. And when I became old, when I became inconvenient, you turned me into inventory, assets, property. Karen sobbed. We didn't mean, yes, you did. Evelyn's hand struck the table, thin but powerful. You meant every signature, every whispered plan in the kitchen while I sat in the next room. You meant to strip me of my dignity, but you failed. She leaned forward, her eyes fierce. I have rewritten my will. You are no longer my heirs. Every last possession, every cent will go elsewhere. To people who remember that I am human. To those who saw me when you did not. The silence that followed was suffocating. Karen buried her face in her hands, her sobs filling the room. Andrew sat rigid, his expression cracked at last, pain flickering across his carefully built composure. Stephen rose to his feet, his fury spilling unchecked. You'll regret this, he spat. You'll die alone, clinging to that girl who's deceived you. And when she leaves, you'll have nothing. Evelyn's eyes locked on his, calm in the storm of his rage. Better to die with nothing than to live betrayed by my own blood. Stephen's mouth opened, then closed. He turned sharply, storming toward the door. Andrew followed in silence, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the floor. Karen lingered, trembling, before finally whispering, I'm sorry, and fleeing after them. The door closed. The apartment fell quiet once more. Evelyn let out a slow breath, her body sagging into the chair. The confrontation had drained her, every word costing more strength than she thought she possessed. Yet inside, a strange calm settled. She had spoken her truth. She had severed the chains. Emily knelt at her side, eyes wide with concern. That must have been so hard. Evelyn reached for her hand, squeezing gently. It was necessary. Sometimes love becomes poison, and you must cut it out before it kills you. The city hummed beyond the window, indifferent to the storm that had just passed inside the small apartment. Evelyn closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her bones. Still, her heart carried a strange lightness. For the first time in years, she was free. Emily had become a fixture in Evelyn's dassum, her presence gentle yet constant, like a soft current guiding her through the loneliness. She prepared meals, kept the apartment tidy, and walked beside Evelyn when her legs felt too unsteady. To neighbors, she looked like the devoted caregiver everyone wished for their aging parent. Evelyn herself began to believe she had been sent a blessing, someone who restored what her own children had stolen. Emily listened with patience, her eyes attentive as Evelyn spoke of memories long buried. The day Daniel broke his arm climbing the old maple, the afternoons when Karen helped her bake pies, the quiet evenings when Stephen read aloud by the fireplace. These stories poured out like a river breaking through a dam. Emily received them without interruption, her smile encouraging Evelyn to share more. For the first time since her husband's death, Evelyn felt her voice mattered again. But beneath the warmth lingered a shadow Evelyn could not name. It showed itself in flashes, a glance too sharp, a question too pointed, a silence that seemed calculated rather than caring. Sometimes, late at night, Evelyn would wake to find Emily still awake, her face lit by the glow of her phone, her expression unreadable. The unease dissolved by morning, replaced by Emily's cheerful laugh. Yet Evelyn began to wonder if kindness could wear a mask. The day the mask slipped was ordinary. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as Emily set down a bowl of soup, steam curling into the air. Evelyn lifted her spoon, then paused. The taste was wrong, not bitter, not spoiled, but faintly metallic, enough to tighten her throat with suspicion. She set the spoon down slowly. Emily, she said softly, did you add something new to the recipe? Emily's eyes flickered, just for a second. Only a pinch of herbs, for your health. Her smile was bright, but her hand trembled as she pushed the bowl closer. Evelyn's heart thudded. She had lived long enough to know when a lie wrapped itself in sweetness. She excused herself, claiming she was too tired to eat, and watched as Emily carried the untouched bowl away, her expression carefully neutral. That night, Evelyn's mind refused rest. The words of her son, Stephen, returned to her like an echo. She's after your money. She's poisoned you against your own family. She had dismissed it then, certain it was only venom from a bitter child. But now the unease coiled tighter. The following morning, Evelyn tested her suspicion. She told Emily she had an appointment with her doctor. She asked her to stay behind and rest. As soon as Emily left for errands, Evelyn searched the kitchen. Her hands shook, not from age, but from dread. In the back of the cupboard, behind neatly stacked jars, she found bottles unlabeled, their contents unfamiliar. Powder, capsules, liquids with faint chemical smells. Her knees weakened. She sank into a chair, the reality crushing her chest. This girl, this supposed companion, had not been a gift. She had been a predator, patient and deliberate. The front door opened. Emily stepped inside, a grocery bag on her arm. When her eyes met Evelyn's, she froze. The jars were still on the table. For a heartbeat, the room held no sound. Then Emily's smile returned, practiced and bright. Those are just supplements. You shouldn't frighten yourself with things you don't understand. But Evelyn's voice was clear, unshaken. No, I understand enough. You've been waiting, pretending, weaving yourself into my trust. But masks always crack. Emily's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing, cold as glass. And what will you do, Evelyn? Call your children? The same children who abandoned you, who betrayed you. You think they'll believe you now? Evelyn rose, her frail body trembling, but her spirit iron strong. I don't need them. I don't need anyone to believe me. I only need to see you for what you are. And I do. Emily set the grocery bag down, her hands tightening into fists. Careful, she hissed. You've already lost your family. Don't make me your enemy too. Evelyn's gaze did not waver. You made yourself my enemy the moment you mistook my loneliness for weakness. For the first time, Emily looked away. The mask slipped fully then, revealing something sharp and ruthless beneath the softness. She grabbed her coat, muttering under her breath, and left the apartment without another word. When the door closed, Evelyn collapsed into her chair, her body shaking. Yet her eyes burned with clarity. Betrayal had come not only from her blood, but from the stranger she had welcomed as salvation. The cruelty cut deep, deeper than even her children's treachery, but it also left her resolute. The world around her had shown its fangs. But Evelyn Carter was no longer afraid. The silence after Emily's departure pressed against the walls like an unspoken verdict. Evelyn sat still, hands clasped in her lap, listening to the faint ticking of the clock. Every sound sharpened, every shadow seemed heavier, and yet her mind felt clearer than it had in months. Truth had a way of burning away the fog. She didn't waste time. The next morning, she called Mr. Harrison. Her voice trembled only at the beginning, then steadied with resolve. I need you to come, she said. There are things I can't ignore anymore. When he arrived, she laid everything before him, the strange pills, the hidden bottles, the lies Emily had wrapped in sweetness. Mr. Harrison listened in silence, his jaw tightening, eyes darkening with each detail. At last he said, This is no ordinary caregiver, Evelyn. I'll contact the authorities. We'll have her investigated. Relief mixed with grief, two tides crashing within her chest. Emily, the woman she had once believed to be her last companion, was nothing but a predator with a false name. It wasn't betrayal from blood this time. It was a stranger's cruelty, one dressed in compassion and trust. The police came quietly, speaking in calm, measured tones. Evelyn answered every question, her voice low but firm, her eyes never wavering. They promised to follow up, to examine the substances she had found, to look into Emily Hartman, or rather, Rachel Jennings. The name sounded foreign on their lips, jagged like glass cutting the tongue. That night, Evelyn slept with the lights on. Fear lingered at the edges of her thoughts, whispering that Rachel might return. But exhaustion carried her away, and when she woke the next morning, she felt lighter, as though a chain had been lifted. Days passed, news trickled in. Rachel had a record, a trail of deceit stretching across states, fraud, theft, exploitation of the elderly. Evelyn listened with an aching heart, realizing she had nearly become another line in that dark history. Still, victory tasted bitter. She had trusted, had opened her most vulnerable corners, only to be deceived once again. Sitting by the window one afternoon, she whispered to herself, "Is that all I am? A target? A prize for scavengers?" Her words disappeared into the autumn air. Mr. Harrison returned soon after, carrying documents in his briefcase. We should update your will again, he said gently. Erase her completely. Remove any trace of her claim. Evelyn nodded, her hands no longer trembled as she signed. Each stroke of the pen was a reclamation, a severing of the last tie that Rachel had tried to bind. When the final page was complete, she closed the folder with a sharp, satisfying sound. Later that evening, she took out her stationery, the same floral set Richard had given her decades ago. She wrote letters to each of her children, her words steady, unflinching. To Andrew, Karen, and Stephen, I once believed legacy was blood, that inheritance was duty, but you showed me otherwise. You sold what was mine without asking. You silenced me. You made me feel less than alive. Do not trouble yourselves now with what remains. I have already taken care of it. She folded the letters neatly, sealed them, and placed them in a drawer. She felt no triumph, no revenge, only a quiet release, as if she had finally exhaled after years of holding her breath. That night, rain tapped gently against the windows. Evelyn brewed herself a cup of tea, sat in her favorite chair, and listened. She no longer imagined Emily bustling in the kitchen, no longer hoped for the sound of children's footsteps. The house was silent, but the silence belonged to her. 2 weeks later, the news came. Rachel Jennings had been caught in another town, arrested while attempting to assume yet another identity. Evelyn read the report twice, her lips pressed into a thin line. Justice had found her, not with thunder or spectacle, but with quiet inevitability. She set the paper aside and looked around her apartment. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets she had tucked in drawers. A small vase of daisies brightened the table. For the first time in years, everything around her was simple, ordinary, untouched by deceit. Her body still carried the ache of age, her steps still faltered, but her spirit felt strangely weightless. Betrayal had scorched her, yes, but it had also stripped away illusion. What remained was not weakness but clarity. Evelyn Carter had lost much, her husband, her home, her children's loyalty. Yet in that loss she had gained something sharper than any possession, the certainty that she belonged to no one but herself. She sipped her tea, let its warmth linger, and whispered into the stillness, "You cannot bury me while I still breathe." And in that quiet vow, Evelyn claimed her victory. The mornings grew softer once Rachel was gone. Light spilled across the curtains without dread following close behind, and the air in Evelyn's apartment no longer carried the metallic taste of fear. Each day she woke with a little more strength, as though her body had been waiting for deceit to be purged before it dared to heal. She shuffled slowly from bedroom to kitchen, each step an act of quiet triumph. The kettle whistled, and she prepared her own coffee, dark, simple, the way Richard used to drink it. She held the mug with both hands, savoring its warmth as if it were proof of survival. For the first time in years, she found joy in the ordinary. She opened the balcony doors and tended the pots of geraniums that had wilted during months of neglect. She hummed to herself as she snipped away dead leaves, her fingers brushing soil, her breath mingling with the morning breeze. It wasn't youth she recovered. It was dignity, stolen for too long. Her children did not call, nor did they visit. Their silence no longer wounded her. Instead, it affirmed her decision. They had chosen distance, and she had chosen freedom. She no longer lived waiting for their approval or fearing their betrayal. That chapter had ended, signed and sealed in her own hand. When Mr. Harrison returned with the finalized documents, Evelyn greeted him at the door with a steadier step. Together, they reviewed the legacy she had designed. Not for those who had abandoned her, not for a stranger who had deceived her, but for lives that might still be lifted from the shadows. Scholarships for young women who dreamed of becoming doctors and teachers, grants for shelters that gave refuge to the forgotten, donations to libraries and community centers where laughter and learning still bloomed. Every page reflected not what she had lost, but what she chose to give. "This," she said as she pressed the final signature, "is my true inheritance. Not bitterness, not chains of blood, but hope." Mr. Harrison's eyes softened. "You've built something larger than yourself, Evelyn. That is no small victory." After he left, Evelyn sat quietly at her table, running her fingers over Richard's photograph. His smile seemed to linger in the frame, as if he approved of every decision she had made. She whispered to him, "I thought I had nothing left. But look, love, I still have a voice. And I'm using it. Autumn slipped into winter. Evelyn's health remained fragile, yet her spirit pulsed with new fire. On days when her hands trembled too much to write, she dictated her thoughts into a recorder, determined to leave behind not just money but words. She spoke of the dignity of the old, the cruelty of neglect, the necessity of seeing those whom the world tries to render invisible. She imagined strangers one day reading her story and pausing, perhaps calling their own mother, perhaps visiting a father forgotten in a facility, perhaps deciding not to treat an elder as mere inventory. That thought steadied her heart more than any medicine could. One evening, as snow dusted the streets outside, Evelyn lit a single candle on the table. Its flame wavered, fragile yet unwavering, much like herself. She poured tea, settled into her chair, and allowed her thoughts to wander. She remembered Richard's laugh, her children's small hands long before they hardened into grasping ones, the sound of rain against the old family house. Pain and joy braided together, inseparable, yet no longer sharp. They had become part of the fabric of her being, threads she carried without regret. When the candle burned low, she closed her eyes. Not in surrender, but in peace. She had chosen her ending, not dictated by betrayal, not stolen by poison, not muted by silence. Her life would echo through scholarships, shelters, and stories. It would echo in the truth she carved from deception, in the dignity she reclaimed from those who tried to bury her. Evelyn Carter had been overlooked, betrayed, and nearly erased. Yet in the end, she became unshakable, a woman who wrote her own final chapter with deliberate grace. And as the night folded around her, she knew one truth above all. She was no ghost. She had lived, she had endured, and she had chosen to leave behind more than pain.